Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak is the frontrunner to move into 10 Downing Street. CBS News correspondent Elaine Cobbe is there in the United Kingdom covering the latest, and she joins us now to talk about it. So, Elaine, do you have any breaking news for us?
I do. Good morning, Vlad. Good morning, Anne-Marie. We now know the name of Britain's new Prime Minister. It will be Rishi Sunak.
Well, there we go.
See, I told you it was imminent. They were counting it down on BBC.
There you
so,
go.
sorry,
Anne-Marie.
Elaine. We shouldn't have cut you off.
No, but I have to give props to Anne-Marie.
Yeah,
yes.
but we cut in on this big announcement.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
Elaine, exactly. Who's the next Prime Minister?
So, yes, Rishi Sunak is now going ahead because Penny Mordaunt, the only other person in the race, pulled out just ahead of the announcement officially by the committee in Westminster behind us, which suggests she did not get the minimum necessary 100 MPs to support her. That's the minimum to get over the barrier to actually be a contender. Now, Rishi Sunak had more than beaten that already. In fact, at last count, he had more than half of all of the Conservative MPs backing him.
All right, so then where do we go from here? Explain the process that will unfold once the nominees are confirmed, because sort of the last time around, there was voting with the general membership.
Right.
So does that happen this time around or no?
No, that's gone. Everything has gone away now. The only person left is Rishi Sunak. So we are expecting to hear imminently that he has been confirmed as Prime Minister, and he'll begin the job very soon.
I can hear the town criers back. He's
Yes.
yelling about our salvation and nothing to actually do with Parliament, so people know. Oh, listen, so we have live pictures of Parliament we're going to dip in right now.
As leader of the Conservative Party. And you may wish to know the new leader of the party will address us in this room at 2:30. Thank you.
All right, so that was a live moment there in London, where we are now told that Rishi Sunak not only has won the Conservative Party leadership, but he is set to make an announcement very soon. So we'll obviously have that live. But first of all, Elaine, let's just talk about, before we even get into the challenges that will face the News PM, can we just pause for a moment and take into account the fact that this is the first British Prime Minister who is South Asian, the first British Prime Minister of color in the history of the United Kingdom, with all of that totality of what that means, the imperial nature of the United Kingdom, the fact that Rishi Sunak hails, his ancestry is from India, that he is South Asian, he's also Hindi. I mean, there's just so many wonderful, amazing things that we can talk about in his personal, just his personal story, before we sort of talk about what this means politically.
Yes, his parents immigrated to England from East Africa, where they had gone from India. Both sides had settled in Africa. And so he was born in Southampton in England. His parents, his father was a doctor, his mother a pharmacist. They worked hard to put him through a private school. He then went to study in Oxford, so far following a very usual trajectory for Conservative MPs. And in college, he began as an intern at Conservative Party HQ. So he was already marking his cards in his political career from an early stage. Now, he also studied briefly in Stanford University, and that's where he met his wife, the daughter of an Indian family settled in the US. And they are reckoned to have a collective income or wealth of some $900 million. And that is something that makes a lot of people wonder, is he really aware of the situation in Britain at the moment? The cost of living crisis, the soaring energy prices. And some say, does he really, really understand what is happening for ordinary people here?
So that brings me to some of the challenges that he's going to face. I mean, that was kind of the big stumbling block for his predecessor, right? That people did not like her plan to stabilize the economy in Great Britain, because part of it had to do with cutting the taxes for very, very wealthy Britons. So let's talk about the challenges, the economy, post-Brexit, and I would also think wrangling and organizing and cultivating the loyalty of this Conservative Party that looks as if it's in disarray.
Absolutely. The party has been split by the crises that saw first Boris Johnson go, the mini budget and tax cuts that Liz Truss brought in and that forced her out, and now this race again. And he has said he wants to unite the party. He said that is one of his main goals. He also wants to work on solving the economic crisis this country is in, because business confidence is at an all-time low. The pound plummeted after Liz Truss's mini budget to its lowest level against the dollar in 50 years. And so he has a lot of work to do, but he has said that he wants to make what he called grown-up decisions, and he believes in financial responsibility. So he will likely bring in some new taxes and rising taxes that certainly his predecessor didn't do, but he says that is what is needed right now. And let's not forget, this is a man who studied finance, who has worked as the Treasury chief. So he has his finger on the pulse of the economy, and he knows that there is a lot of hard work to be done, that there are tough decisions to be made, but he believes that they have to be made, they have to be taken to move the economy forward. And also, as well as uniting the party, he knows that there's a lot of damage to be repaired to Britain's standing in the international community. The allies in Europe have been very concerned about what's going on, and while he is a pro-Brexiteer, that there are some hopes that he might be a little less obsessed with Brexit than Boris Johnson had been, even though he's definitely not going to roll back on any of it.
So, Elaine, before I let you go, something we haven't mentioned is that Rishi Sunak and his wife are one of the wealthiest.
She said that.
Yeah, people. Oh, sorry, if you said
$900 million.
Yeah,
that was shocking to me.
That wealth rivals, I've read, the wealth that King Charles has.
Really?
Yes, they are extremely wealthy. So the question becomes, of course, how are they able to? How will Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, be able to relate to ordinary Britons facing the struggles that they're facing right now, rising inflation and the repercussions of Brexit?
So, and I'll just sort of add on to that, a reminder that he obviously garnered the support of the other MPs, but when he ran and had the general membership vote, they did not support him. They supported Liz Truss.
That's right.
And what you're bringing up, Vlad, may be one of the factors.
Absolutely. The party membership have said again and again that they found him a little less trustworthy than, for example, Penny Mordaunt, who is now out. And there's been a lot of concern voiced that his wealth, his position, his privilege makes him less than optimum. But let's not forget, the Conservative Party is not a working class party. So it's not like there have been too many of them who stand up there and say, I'm a man or a woman of the people. He does say that he wants to improve the economy and promote business confidence. So there's the hope that once the economy improves, that life will improve for people. Now, as the Ukraine war drags on, of course, energy prices will continue soaring. And so there's still a lot of work to be done, and he knows that it's not going to be easy. And what he will have to look ahead to is, in 2 years' time, Britain has to have an election, if none is called before, which they're unlikely to want to do. And Labour, the opposition party at the moment, is far ahead in the polls. So if he wants to counter them, he's also got to look ahead at some way to make sure that people's lives are improved, that the lot of everyone is better, so that they don't automatically go, okay, careholder, and then we are voting in Labour, because the Labour Party is very much gearing up to take over in 2024. Now, 2 years is a very long time in politics, since we've seen a few weeks is too.
Yeah,
Who
for
knows?
sure.
Yeah, right. You could see you could have a whole different prime minister.
Sure. I've seen it before.
Elaine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.